Powerful stuff. And with me in the studio to share their perspective on this TED Talk is homeless teen turned advocate Orayne Williams, Nourishing NYC founder Gina Keatley, and Barbara Brancaccio, spokesperson for the city's Department of Homeless Services. Welcome to you all.
Thanks for having us.
Well, I think the best place to start, Barbara, is with you. Let's talk very broadly. The definition of homelessness here in New York City. What is it, and what is the city doing to help the homeless?
Well, the Department of Homeless Services in New York City, the mandate for our department is to prevent homelessness whenever possible. So working with families before they ever come into the system to keep them in their homes and in their communities through an array of services, including financial services, eviction prevention services, and counseling services. When that's not possible and families come into the shelter system, there is a process. The shelter system is specifically for people who have no other housing options. So, for example, the city of New York is the only city in the United States that has a mandate, excuse me, a mandate to shelter, which means that we must provide temporary housing for people who have no other housing options. And then, of course, there are additional services for people who are street homeless, which is a very different population from those people who are living in the shelter system. So we're working with a variety of definitions of homelessness, actually.
And Becky Blanton's story was very personal. It was a reflection on her own experience, her year of being homeless. Gina Keatley, what was your reaction to her TED Talk?
I have to say that I thought I can understand and sympathize with her issue with her father. I do not consider her homeless. I think it's, she's doing journalistic research for a year. So I think that when you choose, when you decide I'm going to take a year and essentially pretend to be homeless, and you do have options of staying with someone else, or you have options of working. In addition to that, I mean, she's using services that are set aside for people with absolutely no resources. So I'm not in love with it. I can respect her as a journalist for doing that, but I wouldn't define it as that.
So, Orayne, you were homeless as a teenager. Now you're an advocate for the homeless. Do you agree with what Gina said, or do you have a different personal reaction to Becky Blanton's TED Talk?
I have to say I agree with what Gina said, because I feel like if you have a choice, and then if you made the choice to not be in your house, then I don't think that should be defined as, you know, being homeless. I feel like the definition of homeless should be somebody that did not have a choice, that didn't have another resources or somewhere, and then end up living on the street or in a shelter system.
But it did sound as though she suffered from depression, and at some point at least felt as though she had no way out of her situation.
I can relate to that emotion because I too felt depressed and felt like I didn't have any other, way out, any resources. But my situation, I would say, is different because I didn't decide to move in a shelter. I didn't want to move in a shelter. I didn't want to live that lifestyle.
I think it's very realistic that some people who come to the door of the single adult shelter system are suffering from depression. There's no question about that. The similarities are slightly different in the sense that Becky is someone who was able to really transform and develop a level of compassion. And then, of course, 5 or 6 months later, she was giving a TED Talk. So it was very apparent that she had a lot of resources, both personally and emotionally, to really recover from whatever that experience or transformation was, but have the kind of compassion where she's able to talk to people about homelessness in a way that they can understand, and that's wonderful.
Yes.
At the same time, in New York City, that's not exactly realistic in terms of who the population is. And that's not to say that people who aren't in the system don't have a transformative experience or really persevere and go on to do amazing things, because some people do. But in this case, if she had come to our door, maybe with a family member, we might have suggested that she reconnect with a family or a friend rather than be in her car or access services for depression. So there are some people who choose not to access services and want to go down that path.
Which gets me back to your story, Orayne. Tell us a little bit about how you became homeless as a teenager.
Believe it or not, it stemmed from a landlord issue, and then before you know it, my mother and my younger sister, who was 5 months, and at the time I was 17, was on a train going to the Bronx to the PATH department to be registered in the homeless system. And, you know, at the time I felt, you know, helpless, like I couldn't help my mother.
Now, Gina, I marvel that this all started as a landlord-tenant dispute. You have started now your program, Nourishing NYC. You probably are less surprised than I that something that starts out for a family of 3, a single mother with 2 children, as just a landlord-tenant dispute, flourishes into a homelessness situation.
Definitely, and I think that the face of homelessness is a wide variety. And I'm not sure if you have this in your notes, but the reason why I opened Nourishing NYC is because as a child I experienced homelessness myself. And I think that when they see a short, white, well-educated woman, I am not what they think of as the typical homeless person. So I think that his story, and there's so many varieties of stories. And we work with homeless and low income, people that are right on the edge. So I think what it comes down to is that he's a great example of people who are learning to use resources, you know, from other organizations like Nourishing NYC and throughout New York, to really make a difference and to make a significant change. Because these things do happen, but it's about never giving up and about not letting this one situation control your entire life.
And will you say a little more, if you don't mind, about your own experience? Orayne spoke of his feeling of helplessness. He was a bit older, but do you remember much of your own feeling?
I had a very specific, very unique experience where my family had legal issues. And so from 4 to 14, I was essentially homeless, living in houses, living in different, you know, locations. And I'll give you this great example of how, you know, the city is underfunded, organizations are underfunded, and any time that people can use resources within a community, sort of the better.
And of course, they can go to resources provided by people like you who are not necessarily directly affiliated with government services. But what are some other resources that can be available to families like yours or Orayne's?
Well, for organizations like mine, what we really try to do is connect people who are low income and have poverty with nutrition. Because there's a big connection, and you look and see a wide variety of homeless people that are obese. And it's become such an issue with poverty and obesity that we really had to come in and do something about it. And that's really what we do. We have volunteer opportunities. We're always searching for sponsors, so if people want to get involved, they can.
And Barbara, let's talk a little bit about it. We talked about the shelters. That is certainly a thing that makes New York City, I think, distinct from other areas of the country. What other resources is New York City offering to its homeless community?
New York City is the first big city in America that's implemented nutritional standards in all of our meal programs. New York City delivers 260 million meals every year through the schools, through senior centers, through correctional facilities, through the Department of Homeless Services. And in the last 6 years, we've implemented nutritional standards, which are now a model for the country.
And people should know, we always hear about that in the context of the schools, but this applies to all of these other places you've mentioned as well.
Correctional facilities, Health and Hospital Corporation, which is the public hospitals in the city. So there's
and the homeless shelters.
That's absolutely correct. So there is a nutritional standard which has been transformed in the city so far. Additionally, we've worked very hard to increase the number of people who access food stamps, which is now called SNAP. So, for example, when I started working a few years ago at the Human Resources Administration in 2006, it was 1.2 million people were on food stamps, and today, in 2011, 1.8 million people are on food stamps. So increasing people's ability to access that EBT card, which makes it easier than ever for them to be able to go into any of the thousands of locations in New York City to be able to access food, is critical. And using food stamps as a work support. So if you are a low wage earner, you could bolster your income by having that extra money, whether it's $200, $100, $300 for larger families. It's more money, and you're able to use that for food. Additionally, there are green carts throughout the city, which I know that you are really utilizing. And we're able to use food stamps and the SNAP, the EBT card, at these green markets. And now there are incentives additionally for tax incentives for businesses, food businesses, to develop in what we call these food deserts, the areas of the city that that low-income people are living in, but at the same time don't have access to good food. And there are also incentives for bodegas and supermarkets and so forth, and working with nonprofit organizations. So inside the shelters, when people come into the shelter, even though our priority is to offer temporary emergency housing or temporary emergency shelter, the social workers who work there, and I think that you could speak to this best, I mean, this is a group of people that go into this business because it's a vocation, it's a calling. So their work is not just to sort of organize the shelter, but connect people to social services in the community so that some of the other issues can be addressed.
So, Orayne, let's have you speak to that.
Yeah,
how about
really,
the social workers and the rest of it? How well do all these programs really speak to the needs of the homeless?
I can really speak on that. Plus, I'm taking social work class, and the category of social worker that Barbara was describing is basically categorized and called the broker, where social workers serve as like a resource person for resident in the shelter, where they connect you to different resources that you need. For example, I know when I moved in to the shelter, my social worker, the first thing she asked me, she was like, are you comfortable at your school? She was already have a list of schools that's closer to the shelter that she was like, if you want, we can, advocate for you to transfer to go to that school. She introduced me to a lot of male empowerment program, SAT prep programs, College Now program, and then it was so resourceful. She would come to my mother and then, set up meetings between my mother and the case manager or I think the work manager, whatever the title is, for my mother to like try to get a job or something. But I think they have so many resources. The social workers within the shelter system are well connected outside of the walls of the shelter to like the Department of Education, to maybe different hospitals, to the counseling centers, counseling school centers, and I remember at one point my social worker came to my school to advocate for me when I was facing a hard time, at one point lashing out in school, where I was facing, I think, some suspension or something like that. And she came there and she advocated and she, talked on behalf of me. So I think they're pretty helpful. They serve really well as people who, connect you to resources.
But in the end, it was something inside of you that pulled you out of all of this and motivated you now to do your own thing, to become an advocate and to start your own organization. Tell us about this new direction in your life and what you're doing now and why.
Definitely, and you're correct. You can't solely depend on the social worker. It have to be a drive inside of you that want to overcome. Exactly, a calling. And my drive was that my only way out of this predicament is through higher education. So despite my circumstances, despite not having, because at one point I was in the family shelter with my mother, and then she threw me out of that shelter, so now I was in a shelter as an unaccompanied youth by myself. So despite the support of family members, I knew that my only way out of this predicament was through higher education, so I wanted to go to college, and because of that, I worked unflinchingly and unfailingly in my class, on my SAT and my different exam. And I'm in college now, my second year of college, and I'm currently the founder and chairperson of PPM, which is an acronym for Progressive People Movement. And we recently got incorporated September 2nd. And
Congratulations.
Thank you. And currently seeking 501c3 status. What PPM does is we work with at-risk youth. And when I say at-risk youth, those in the shelter, inner city, shelter and inner city currently, and such as students in high school and middle school, and hopefully looking towards working with those incarcerated. And our mission is to equip young people with 3 fundamental tools, which are goal-setting skills, decision-making skills, and communication skills. And we do this through vigorous activities and workshops under the 4 components that we have, which are mentoring, college readiness, overcoming obstacle, and advocacy component. The main concept is to keep young people working with and servicing young people, because I feel by doing that it eliminates the notion that young people are oftentimes a part of the problem. And my main motivation is that I feel like if I can do it, and I could not have done it without a support system. So I want to be the support system for youth who are facing the challenges that I have been through. So being that support system, they can overcome just as I overcame my tough times.
And we should say that the Daily News made you its success story of 2010. So I want to get that little shout out. now, Gina, I want to. You're also a huge success. And how much of what motivates you is rooted in your personal story of homelessness, not just in Nourishing NYC, but everything that you do? How much of it, of your life story, is about that struggle?
Well, I think that it's my entire personality. I think a lot of people that are sort of the way I am, very aggressive, very, I have to constantly be moving forward, I'm always striving for success, is because I've experienced, obstacles to overcome, and it defines me. And regardless how successful I become, I still have that drive and push. And I have to say the best thing is when you turn that on in someone else, and you can see that start to go. Because at Harlem and throughout all the boroughs that we work, when I see that somebody, I think, all right, I did my job, moving on. It's nice to see it and kind of have it move on. Right?
What's the biggest misconception of the homeless?
That
you want to touch on that too? Okay, let's quickly each go around. What's the biggest misconception?
I would say that everyone who's homeless is a drunk or lazy. I think people have circumstances, and again, I have a unique circumstance because as a child, I didn't have, a lot of say what was going on. But it's really, if it hasn't touched you, I'm sure it's touched someone that you know, and it's really everywhere. I think that's what people would probably have the most misconception.
Orayne, biggest misconception?
The biggest misconception is people believe in and thinking that homelessness have an image. Homelessness does not have an image. Not because you're homeless, you're gonna walk around with, ripped up clothes, dirty clothes, the same clothes for, for several weeks. And homelessness does not have an image, and anyone can be homeless. You can be coming home from work, driving in your Benz, have a beautiful day at work, and come just in time to see a house on fire, and you don't have enough money to move into a new apartment right on the spot, and you have to go into a temporary housing. That's why it's called temporary housing. It's not permanent housing. You don't live in the shelter for the rest of your life, so it doesn't define you.
Barbara, what's the biggest misconception of the home?
Well, I definitely have witnessed many, many misconceptions, particularly in my job. So I think one important misconception is that the street homeless and the population in the shelter are the same, or people who are living on the street are coming into the shelter. That is what people see every day, and so that's what they think homeless is. People who are living on the street have many problems. They have mental health issues, they have substance abuse issues, and they are approached on a regular basis by outreach teams. When you call 311 and say that there's a homeless person on the corner of your block, we send an outreach team out immediately. And in many cases, our outreach teams have relationships with those people for years on end. They know who they are, they know where they live, even though they're on the street. And that's a unique population. The people who are in the shelter are, again, another unique population. I think that there is also a misconception that people who are living in shelter don't want to work, or they can't work for some reason. And while they many people may not have jobs when they come in to shelter, they do indeed want to work. Everyone wants to work, especially in New York City, and especially in the United States. I mean, now more than ever, people talk about wanting jobs, but it's not possible to survive in the city without some income source, whether it's SSI or public assistance. And our main priority is when people come into the family shelter system is to link them with employment in some way to get that ball rolling, so that even if it's a low-wage job, there is the ability to develop some kind of a momentum, employment history, so that you can go on and at some point you are able to sustain yourself independently in the community. That's what people want. They want to be independent and they want to be working.
How do we end the cycle of homelessness?
Well, we cannot control the front door. There are many reasons why people become homeless, and I think that we've discussed a variety of them. Some of them are economic, some of them are mental health issues, and I think that the city of New York has to be able to provide for all of those people under all of those circumstances. I think we need to continue to connect people with jobs. And I think that we need to work very hard, and we are working very, very hard to try to prevent it to begin with. So if people think that they might be encountering homelessness, or they might be having a problem with their landlord, or facing eviction, or they're not able to pay their bills, they need to be able to access the services that we're providing first, so that we could prevent them from coming in the door to begin with. And I think that those people who have children, or they have the instinct to sort of follow the path that you're talking about, to get really connected with empowering resources, to connect to great health, that's another path. But and we can connect those people to this sort of the nonprofits and the community partners that we have. But for the most part, the city is really focused on prevention and employment, and that's the direction that we're going in.
Well, no better place to end. Thank you so much, Barbara Brancaccio.
Thank you.
Gina Keatley, Orayne Williams, all for being here. And that is our show. Join me next time for more compelling conversation on TED Talks in NYC. And we leave you with some of our other TED Show panelists. Here's what they had to say when we asked, what lifestyle changes have you made since the downturn in the economy? Thanks for watching. I'm Jami Floyd.
I bike to work.
Public transportation.
Trying to get more natural forms of exercise.
Not eating out as much.
I just end up talking about and caring more about people who are less fortunate than me.
I work harder. I read a lot more economics.
Trying not to spend money on frivolous things.